It was another ordinary morning in the military base. The mess hall buzzed with activity as soldiers hurried in for breakfast. The smell of freshly cooked eggs, warm bread, and strong coffee filled the air, mixing with the clatter of trays and chatter of men in uniform. Amid all this, a young woman moved quietly between the tables, carrying trays and serving food. She wore the simple uniform of the mess staff, her hair neatly tied back, and her expression calm, almost unreadable. Most of the soldiers didn't pay much attention to her. She blended into the background, just another part of the routine, someone who quietly made their mornings a little easier. She had been doing this job for a few months now. Each day felt predictable, almost boring, but she didn't mind. She liked the calm, the rhythm of serving, the small conversations with the soldiers as they came in for breakfast. It gave her time to observe, to move unnoticed among the crowd, and, most importantly, to keep herself under the radar. In a place where every rank, every decoration, and every story mattered, being invisible had its own kind of safety. She had learned early on that attention could be dangerous or at least uncomfortable. As she poured coffee into a mug for a tall soldier in the front row, she smiled politely, nodding when he thanked her. She moved on to the next table, her steps quiet, practiced. Her eyes scanned the room, not out of curiosity but out of habit. Years in the military had taught her to always be aware, to notice patterns, people, movements. It was a skill she had learned long before she started working here, and one she carried silently, like a hidden weapon. Nobody could have guessed that beneath her calm demeanor and ordinary uniform, she had lived a life most soldiers only read about in reports or saw in medals. Her past was filled with missions in faraway deserts, jungles, and snowy mountains, where the stakes were life and death, and the skills she had learned could have turned her into one of the most dangerous people on the planet. Yet here she was, carrying trays of scrambled eggs and toast, chatting politely with the soldiers, her past hidden like a secret tattoo beneath her sleeve. She paused for a moment to refill a container of juice. The room was lively, the soldiers laughing and teasing each other, the sound of trays clinking and chairs scraping the floor. She listened to their conversations not because she was interested, but because listening was part of who she was. She knew how to read people, to notice the smallest detail that others missed. And today, just like every day, she was careful not to reveal too much. A flicker of her tattoo, the symbol that marked her as a member of an elite special forces unit, peeked from under her sleeve, but she made sure no one noticed. Most people didn't look too closely anyway. In the corner, the colonel walked in. He was a tall, stern-looking man with sharp eyes that seemed to notice everything. He carried himself with authority, his boots echoing softly on the polished floor. Most people in the room straightened a little when he walked by, but she didn't. She kept moving, serving food, her expression calm. But as he moved through the room, his gaze fell on her. For a moment he paused, something catching his attention that made him stop in his tracks. It wasn't her uniform. It wasn't the way she carried herself. It was something small, subtle, a glimpse of something that seemed oddly familiar. She didn't notice him staring, focused entirely on her task. She handed a plate to a young soldier and moved on to another table, her movements smooth and practiced. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, though she didn't let it distract her. Years of training had taught her to remain composed under pressure, to hide emotions, to stay unnoticed when needed. And right now, staying unnoticed was exactly what she wanted. The colonel continued to watch, a flicker of curiosity crossing his face. He had seen many soldiers come and go, but something about this young woman made him pause. Perhaps it was the confidence in her movements, the way she observed the room without drawing attention to herself. Perhaps it was the faint glimpse of her tattoo, partially hidden under her sleeve, a symbol he had only seen a few times in his long career. His curiosity grew, though he remained quiet, watching her as she moved gracefully from table to table, serving breakfast, chatting politely, and all the while carrying herself as if she belonged to this ordinary world. She finished her morning round and took a deep breath, her hands moving to clear some plates. It was an ordinary day, just like every other. Yet for reasons she didn't know, someone's eyes were on her today in a way they never had been before. She had no idea that her past, her secret, was about to catch up to her in a way that would change everything. And as she moved through the mess hall, unnoticed by everyone else, the colonel's sharp eyes followed her every step, intrigued, sensing that beneath the ordinary surface, something extraordinary was waiting to be revealed. And so the ordinary morning continued with laughter, chatter, and the smell of breakfast in the air. But for these two people in the room, a quiet tension had begun. The stage was set, and the story of a hidden hero was about to begin. The mess hall was still busy, filled with the chatter and laughter of soldiers enjoying their breakfast. The clinking of trays and cutlery created a familiar rhythm, one that the young woman had learned to move through effortlessly. She had been doing this job for months now, and her routine was nearly perfect. Pour coffee here, serve eggs there, offer a smile when thanked, and move on without drawing attention. That had always been her goal, to be ordinary, invisible, unremarkable. But today was different. As she moved past the long tables, she noticed a change in the atmosphere. There was a presence that she couldn't ignore, even if she wanted to. The colonel was walking slowly through the mess hall, his eyes scanning the room with the quiet authority of a man who had seen it all. Most soldiers straightened in their seats, greeting him with polite nods or quiet "Sir S." But for her, this was different. His gaze lingered just a little longer than expected. It wasn't the casual glance of someone passing through. It was an observation, sharp and precise, like a predator noticing something hidden in plain sight. She moved carefully, carrying a tray of toast and eggs to a table near the back. Her hands were steady, her steps measured, as if she had done this 1,000 times before, which in many ways she had. Serving food was simple compared to what she had been trained for, but it required its own kind of focus. A dropped tray, a spilled drink, or a careless word could draw unwanted attention. She had learned to control everything about herself, from her movements to her expressions, and today, that control was more necessary than ever. The colonel's eyes followed her, and she sensed it, not because of any conscious thought, but because she had a trained awareness that rarely failed. Something about his stare made her heart rate quicken slightly, not out of fear, but out of instinct. She had encountered many eyes, many assessments, in her past, and she knew one when she saw it. This was not ordinary attention. This was scrutiny, and it carried weight. As she served the soldiers at the back table, a small slip of her sleeve revealed the edge of a tattoo. It was subtle, just a hint of dark ink, but it was enough to catch the colonel's attention. He froze for a fraction of a second, the movement so slight that no one else noticed. But for him, it was a signal. He had seen that design before, on the few elite soldiers who had passed through his command years ago, men and women who had taken part in missions so dangerous that most people couldn't even imagine them. The tattoo was more than ink. It was a mark of distinction, a symbol of courage, skill, and experience beyond the ordinary soldier. The colonel's mind raced as he recalled fragments from memory. He remembered hearing stories of a soldier who had disappeared from active duty, someone who had been part of the special forces, someone who had carried out missions in places so dangerous that the world barely knew they happened. And here, in front of him, moving quietly between tables, was someone who matched that description perfectly. He blinked once, trying to convince himself that he was mistaken. But the edge of the tattoo, combined with her calm, measured movements and the quiet confidence she carried, told him otherwise. She didn't notice his stare. She continued her work, pouring juice, handing over plates, and chatting politely with soldiers. A few smiled at her kindness, but no one else paid attention to the subtle tension building across the room. The colonel, however, had made up his mind. He needed to confirm what he suspected, and he had to do it carefully. Drawing attention or making a scene would not help. She had to remain unaware for now. He needed to watch, to assess, and then act when the time was right. Her day continued, a careful dance of ordinary tasks and hidden vigilance. She refilled coffee, offered seconds, and kept her smile steady. Inside, her mind wandered briefly. Working in the mess hall was simple, peaceful, and safe, but it wasn't the life she had once known. She had been trained for more than this. She had faced situations where a single mistake could cost lives, where decisions had to be made in seconds, and where courage was tested in ways that most people couldn't imagine. Here, she could almost forget that past, almost pretend to be just another face in the mess hall. But the colonel's gaze reminded her that the past never truly stayed hidden. As breakfast hour came to an end, the soldiers began to leave, trays in hand, their conversations drifting into the corridors outside. The young woman began clearing tables, wiping surfaces, stacking plates with practiced efficiency. The colonel remained behind, lingering, watching her with an intensity that made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. He wasn't just observing her movements, he was reading them. Every step, every gesture, every glance was telling him a story he was only beginning to understand. Finally, when the mess hall was nearly empty, he stepped closer. His voice was calm but firm as he called her name. She turned, polite surprise on her face, and met his eyes. There was a moment of silence, a quiet acknowledgement that something unusual was happening. The colonel's expression softened slightly, though his gaze remained sharp. He had recognized her. Not just the tattoo, but the presence, the discipline, the unspoken strength that radiated from her. And in that moment, the ordinary day in the mess hall changed. She was no longer just another person serving breakfast. Unseen by everyone else, her hidden past had been noticed, and it was only a matter of time before the story of the woman behind the tattoo would unfold. The colonel stood quietly for a moment, his sharp eyes fixed on the young woman moving calmly among the tables. Something about her felt both familiar and extraordinary. He had seen countless soldiers in his years of service, but very few left a mark on him simply by existing in a room. And yet, there she was, ordinary in appearance yet carrying an aura of discipline, strength, and confidence that was impossible to ignore. His gaze flicked down to the small tattoo peeking out from under her sleeve once again. That symbol was unmistakable, one that belonged only to an elite group of Special Forces operatives, a unit known for its courage, precision, and the kind of missions that were whispered about in secret. Memories he had long buried came rushing back. Years ago, he had commanded special missions, coordinating teams of soldiers in the most dangerous parts of the world. He had seen heroes rise and fall, some of them so skilled and fearless that they seemed almost untouchable. And then there had been her or someone like her, a soldier who had disappeared quietly from the radar, someone who had left behind a trail of success and mystery. The thought sent a jolt through him. Could it really be her? Could this young woman, serving coffee and eggs in the mess hall, be the same person whose name had once been spoken with admiration and caution among the elite? He studied her closely. Every movement she made was controlled, smooth, efficient. The way she carried herself, even while performing such ordinary tasks, told him she was trained to be aware at all times. He had seen that precision before in the field during operations where any lapse could be fatal. It was impossible for someone untrained to hide that kind of discipline so naturally. And yet, she didn't seem threatening. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She simply existed in the space, quietly going about her work, almost like a shadow that belonged to the room but was not part of it. A small smile flickered on the colonel's face. He had to know for sure. It wasn't enough to simply recognize the tattoo or the posture. He needed confirmation. But this wasn't a situation to confront recklessly. If she had chosen to hide herself here, perhaps to recover, perhaps to take a break from the intensity of her past life, he could not startle her or risk her disappearing again. He would need to be careful, subtle, strategic, the way she had likely been trained to handle situations herself. He watched her as she moved to the end of a table, setting down a tray of eggs and toast. She smiled politely at a young soldier who thanked her, and her eyes briefly scanned the room before moving on. That glance, so quick and effortless, told him more than words ever could. She was aware of her surroundings, constantly observing, reading every gesture, every movement. It was the kind of awareness that could save lives in moments of crisis, the kind that only comes from years of training in the most demanding conditions. For a moment, the colonel allowed himself to imagine what her life must have been like before she came here. He pictured distant deserts, dense jungles, cold mountains, places where missions were executed with precision and danger was a constant companion. He thought of the fear she must have faced, the courage it must have taken to survive, the intelligence and skill required to navigate situations where every decision was a matter of life and death. And yet, here she was, serving food quietly, almost as if those years had never happened. But he knew better. He could see the strength in the way she held herself, the careful control in her movements, the calmness in her eyes. Those were the marks of someone extraordinary, someone who had survived much more than this ordinary setting could ever test her for. The colonel's curiosity deepened. He needed to act, but he also needed to respect her choice to remain unnoticed. He decided that he would speak to her after the mess hall quieted down, away from the eyes of others. There was no rush, no need for drama. He simply had to ensure that he approached the situation with tact and care. He didn't want her to feel threatened, nor did he want to scare her into hiding further. What mattered now was understanding who she really was and why she had chosen this life, seemingly so far removed from the one her training had prepared her for. As the soldiers finished their meals and left the room, the young woman continued clearing tables, moving with efficiency and precision. Each plate stacked, each table wiped, each gesture made it clearer to the colonel that he had recognized someone exceptional. She was more than the uniform she wore, more than the quiet work she did, more than the ordinary role she appeared to occupy. There was a story beneath the surface, a life of courage, discipline, and hidden heroism that demanded respect. Finally, the mess hall began to empty. The chatter dimmed, trays clattered less, and the room became quieter. The colonel stepped closer, his mind focused and deliberate. He called her name softly, catching her attention. She turned, a polite look on her face, unaware of the thoughts racing behind his eyes. He studied her carefully, noting the steadiness of her gaze, the calm confidence in her posture, the quiet strength she carried without needing to announce it. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. The colonel had recognized her, truly recognized her, not just by the tattoo but by the presence, the discipline, and the aura of someone who had lived through experiences most people could not imagine. For the first time, he saw her as she really was, a trained, capable, extraordinary individual whose past life had been hidden, until now, beneath the ordinary mask of a mess hall worker. The ordinary morning in the mess hall had quietly shifted. While the soldiers continued with their routines, unaware of what had just happened, the colonel and the young woman stood in the quiet tension of recognition. Her secret was safe for the moment, but it would not remain hidden forever. The story of the woman behind the tattoo was beginning to unfold, and the first threads of that tale were being carefully, silently, woven in the eyes of a man who knew what to look for. The mess hall had quieted down after the morning rush, leaving only the faint smell of coffee and toast lingering in the air. The young woman continued clearing tables, stacking plates, and wiping crumbs with steady hands. She moved efficiently, her eyes scanning the room even as she performed the simple, repetitive tasks. Years of training had taught her to stay aware at all times, and that awareness had become almost second nature. Little did she know, she was being observed in a way she couldn't yet see. The colonel had remained behind, watching her from a distance. He had made up his mind. He needed answers, and the only way to get them was to speak with her directly. But he knew he had to be careful. She had not only the skills of a special forces soldier but also the instincts. Any sudden move or harsh question could make her retreat further into secrecy. He needed to approach her with respect, tact, and patience, just as one would handle a delicate operation. Finally, he stepped closer. "Excuse me," he said quietly, his voice firm but calm. She paused mid-motion, turning toward him, polite surprise on her face. Her eyes met his, steady and unflinching. There was nothing ordinary about the way she looked at him. It was the look of someone who was trained to analyze, to observe, and to anticipate. Yet she didn't back away or show fear. She simply waited, as if expecting him to speak. "I need to talk to you," the colonel said softly, motioning toward a quieter corner of the mess hall. She nodded slightly, finishing the task in her hands before following him. Every step she took was careful, measured, yet effortless, revealing her control over her body and movements. It was subtle, but to the colonel it screamed experience. He could sense the weight of her past life in the way she carried herself, the quiet confidence that only came from surviving situations most people could never imagine. Once they were away from the remaining staff, he finally allowed himself to speak freely. "I noticed your tattoo," he began, keeping his tone neutral. "The one on your forearm. I recognize it. That design belongs to an elite special forces unit." He watched her carefully, searching for any reaction. For a moment she hesitated. Her eyes flicked down to the sleeve that hid the rest of the tattoo, and then back to his face. She said nothing, but the slight tension in her shoulders told him that she had been expecting someone to notice one day. She had trained herself to remain calm, to hide her past, but she knew the signs could be noticed by the right person. And this man, this colonel, was someone who clearly saw more than most. He continued gently, "I need to know, is it true? Were you part of those missions?" Her pause was long enough to make him cautious. Then she nodded slightly. "Yes," she admitted quietly, her voice calm, yet carrying the weight of everything she had lived through. She didn't elaborate immediately. She didn't have to. The colonel already knew the truth in her posture, her controlled breathing, the calm precision in her movements. "What happened?" he asked softly, still keeping his distance. "Why are you here, in the mess hall, serving breakfast instead of being out there doing what you were trained for?" She took a deep breath, looking down at her hands for a brief moment. Then she looked back at him, her eyes steady. "I needed a break," she said simply. "Not from the work, not from the missions themselves, but from everything else. From the attention, the expectations, the constant danger. I needed a place where I could exist without being watched, without being judged." The colonel listened, understanding dawning in his eyes. He had seen soldiers burn out, even the best of them, and he knew the toll it took to operate at that level. But still, he was amazed. Here was someone who had walked through fire, survived the impossible, and yet chose to hide in plain sight, quietly performing a job that seemed so ordinary. It took a certain kind of courage to step away from that world and pretend to be ordinary, to carry the weight of experience without letting anyone know. She continued, her voice softer now. "I can do more if needed. I know my skills are still here, but for now I just need this, to be unnoticed, to live a normal life, even if it's just for a little while." The colonel nodded slowly. He could see the truth in her words. He could see the discipline, the strength, and the humility in someone who had experienced more than most could ever imagine. And he knew he had a choice. He could respect her wish to remain hidden, or he could find a way to bring her skills back into play. "Very well," he said finally, his voice calm but carrying authority. "I believe you. But know this, if you ever decide to step back into the line of duty, your experience and skills will be needed. And I will make sure you are recognized for what you truly are." A small, almost imperceptible smile crossed her face. It wasn't a smile of pride, nor of arrogance, but one of relief. Someone had seen her, truly seen her, and understood. It was rare and it was comforting. For a moment, they simply stood there, two people connected by unspoken respect. The ordinary mess hall around them seemed distant, unimportant compared to the quiet understanding that had passed between them. The colonel knew that she had chosen this path carefully, and that her skills were still formidable. She, in turn, knew that this man would not betray her secret, that he understood why she had hidden herself. And in that quiet moment, the balance between past and present shifted. She was no longer just a young woman serving food. She was a soldier, a survivor, a person whose story was hidden but not forgotten. And the colonel, who had seen her for what she truly was, became the first person outside of her past to recognize that extraordinary truth. As they walked back toward the tables, the colonel's mind was already considering the possibilities. How could someone with her experience be best utilized? How could her skills serve the unit without compromising her desire for peace? He didn't have the answers yet, but he knew one thing for certain. The ordinary mess hall had just become the stage for something extraordinary, and the story of this hidden hero was only beginning. The colonel led her to a quiet corner of the base, away from the mess hall and the eyes of other soldiers. The room was small but private, with a single table and 2 chairs. It wasn't luxurious, but it provided the perfect space for what needed to happen next. The truth had to come out. He gestured for her to sit, though she remained standing for a moment, her posture straight, disciplined, ready for anything. There was no fear in her eyes, only calm control, a quiet confidence that made him realize just how much she had endured in her past life. "Now," the colonel began, his voice calm but firm, "I need to know everything. If you are truly who I think you are, there is no hiding from it. Tell me why you are here, serving food, instead of being out in the field like the rest of the special forces." She took a deep breath, as if gathering years of memories into a single moment. "I joined the special forces when I was young," she began, her voice steady. "I wanted to serve. I wanted to push myself to the limit. The missions were dangerous, sometimes impossible. But I survived. I completed each task. I learned things that most people can't even imagine." Her eyes briefly flicked to the colonel, gauging his reaction. He was silent, listening intently, as if he could already feel the weight of what she was saying. "I was part of a unit," she continued. "A team trained for the most extreme conditions. We were sent into deserts, jungles, mountains, places where a single mistake could cost lives. I lost friends along the way. I lost pieces of myself along the way. And after years of missions, I realized I needed something else. I needed to step back. I needed to exist for a while, without danger, without the constant pressure, without having to prove myself every single day." The colonel nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. He had seen soldiers burn out, even the most disciplined, even the strongest. And yet, he was struck by her humility. She spoke of her achievements not with pride, but with matter-of-fact honesty. There was no exaggeration, no need to impress. Just truth laid bare, and it was powerful. She hesitated for a moment, then continued. "So I took this job here, serving food, keeping a low profile. I can be useful without being noticed. I can exist without the world demanding more from me than I can give. But I'm still capable. My skills are still there. If needed, I can operate at full capacity. I chose to step back, for now." The colonel leaned forward slightly, his interest deepening. "And the missions?" he asked quietly. "The operations you were part of, do they define you?" She shook her head slightly. "No. They made me who I am, yes. They taught me discipline, resilience, strategy, and patience. They taught me to read people, to notice details others miss, to survive when survival seemed impossible. But they do not define me. I am more than my missions. I am more than the danger I faced. I am myself." The colonel studied her carefully. He could see the truth in her eyes, the honesty in her voice, and the strength in her posture. This was not a person boasting of past glory. This was a person who had faced the extremes of life and chosen to return to something ordinary, something simple, while carrying that extraordinary experience quietly within. "You are remarkable," he said finally, his voice carrying both admiration and thoughtfulness. "You've accomplished more than most people could dream of. And yet, you've chosen humility. You've chosen a place where no one notices you. Why?" She smiled faintly, almost sad, almost wistful. "Because sometimes, being remarkable isn't about showing the world. Sometimes, it's about living quietly and carrying the experience with you. The world doesn't always need to know what you've done. And sometimes, the greatest mission is to survive and keep your humanity intact." For a moment, the room was silent, filled only with the quiet hum of the bass outside. The colonel reflected on her words, realizing the depth of what she had endured. He had commanded soldiers, faced dangerous situations himself, but he had rarely encountered someone who had survived so much and yet remained so grounded. She had chosen not to parade her accomplishments, not to boast or seek recognition, but to live a life that was meaningful to her alone. "You should not hide your skills forever," he said finally, his voice firm but understanding. "The unit, the missions, the country, they may need someone like you. And yet, I respect your choice to step back, to live quietly. But know this, Your talent, your experience, your bravery. Those are not things you should forget. They are a part of you, and they will always be needed. She nodded, acknowledging his words. There was a quiet understanding between them now, a recognition of both her past and her present. The colonel had seen her for who she truly was, and she had shared her truth without fear or pretense. It was a rare connection, one built on mutual respect, and it carried a sense of reassurance she hadn't expected. As they left the quiet room and returned to the mess hall, the world outside remained unaware of what had just transpired. To everyone else, she was still just a young woman serving food. But now, the colonel carried knowledge of her extraordinary past, and she carried the quiet relief of having revealed her story to someone who understood. In that moment, the ordinary space of the mess hall became extraordinary. She was no longer just a server. She was a soldier, a survivor, and a hero hidden in plain sight. And for the first time, someone outside of her past life recognized her true value, setting the stage for the story that was only beginning to unfold. The days following her revelation passed quietly at first, but the colonel's mind could not stop thinking about her. He knew she had hidden skills, abilities that could make a real difference if needed. Yet, he also understood her wish to remain unnoticed, to live a life that felt ordinary for now. Still, he had to be sure. He had to see, quietly and carefully, whether her skills were still sharp, whether the extraordinary woman hiding behind the mess hall uniform could rise to the challenge again if called upon. One morning, he devised a subtle test. It was not an official mission, not a formal evaluation, but something that would reveal her instincts, her awareness, and her capacity to act under pressure. He had arranged for a simulated emergency, a situation that appeared ordinary but would demand observation, quick thinking, and precision. He called her over under the pretense of needing help with supplies for a training exercise. She approached calmly, polite but cautious, sensing nothing out of the ordinary. "Could you help me set this up?" the colonel asked, gesturing toward a small stack of equipment in a corner. "It won't take long, and I could use an extra pair of hands." She nodded and began helping, unaware of what had been planned. As she moved, the colonel watched her carefully. Every motion she made was efficient, precise, and deliberate. She moved quickly, yet nothing seemed rushed. Every action had a purpose. Her eyes scanned the room continuously, noting every detail, the placement of objects, the layout of the space, even the smallest distractions. It was as if she were already preparing for a scenario she didn't yet fully know existed. Then the simulated emergency began. A loud noise echoed from the hallway, followed by the sound of someone shouting. To anyone else, it might have seemed chaotic, confusing, or even alarming. But to her, it was an instant call to assess the situation. She stopped briefly, listening, then moved toward the source of the disturbance with careful steps. She didn't panic. She didn't hesitate. Every movement was controlled, measured, as though she were reading the room, calculating every possibility, preparing to act if necessary. The colonel watched her reaction closely. She assessed, decided, and then executed. She intercepted a threat placed as part of the test, a harmless but strategically positioned object meant to simulate danger, and handled it with skill that spoke of countless missions in the past. She moved quietly, efficiently, and decisively, ensuring that the situation was neutralized without causing unnecessary attention. Every gesture, every choice, every action demonstrated not only skill but calm under pressure, the hallmark of someone trained to operate in extreme conditions. The colonel allowed himself a small smile. She had not only passed the test but had done so effortlessly, her instincts flawless, her precision undeniable. It was clear that despite her choice to step back and live quietly, the training, the discipline, and the experience remained intact. She was still extraordinary, still capable, and yet, she remained humble, understated, and composed. Once the simulated emergency concluded, he approached her quietly. "You handled that very well," he said. She gave a polite nod, still unaware that she had just been evaluated. There was no arrogance in her response, no desire for praise. She simply moved on to help clean up, her focus always on the task at hand. The colonel realized something important in that moment. Her humility was as remarkable as her skill. She didn't need recognition or admiration. She didn't seek glory. She simply acted, efficiently and correctly, because that was who she was. And it was rare to find someone with such extraordinary ability who also carried such quiet composure. He decided to test her one more time in a slightly different way. A series of subtle, small tasks were introduced. Unobtrusive observations, small puzzles, and minor challenges designed to measure her awareness and decision-making. She handled each one with ease, completing tasks quickly but carefully, noticing details that most people would have missed entirely. He could see the gears turning in her mind, the analysis and strategy working silently beneath the surface. Every action was deliberate yet natural. It was instinct and training working together flawlessly. By the end of the morning, the colonel had gathered everything he needed. She was still the same woman who served breakfast quietly in the mess hall, but now he knew beyond doubt that she was also a highly trained, highly capable operative whose skills remained sharp. Her talent had not diminished with time. It had simply been concealed, hidden beneath the ordinary routine she had chosen for herself. As she moved away to continue her daily tasks, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. The soldiers around her continued their routines, completely unaware of the extraordinary woman in their midst. To them, she was just another worker, a quiet presence in the background. To the colonel, however, she was something far more remarkable. A hidden hero, a master of skills honed through years of danger and discipline, capable of rising to the occasion whenever needed. And yet, what struck him most was her choice to remain humble. The test had proven her abilities, but it had also revealed her character. She did not flaunt her skills. She did not demand recognition. She simply existed, quietly performing her role while carrying the weight of her extraordinary past. It was a rare combination, and one that commanded both respect and admiration. As the day ended, the colonel knew one thing for certain. She was ready for anything, should the need arise. But he also understood why she chose to remain hidden, why she had stepped back from the life she was trained for. She had earned the right to live quietly, to find peace, while still retaining the extraordinary capabilities that made her unique. And that balance between humility and strength, between ordinary life and extraordinary skill, was what made her truly remarkable. The mess hall returned to its normal rhythm, but for the colonel, the ordinary scene had changed forever. He had witnessed something exceptional, hidden in plain sight, and he knew that the story of this remarkable woman was only beginning. Days turned into weeks, and life at the base returned to its usual rhythm. Soldiers came and went, the mess hall buzzed with activity, and the young woman continued her quiet work, serving food with the same calm efficiency she always had. To the casual observer, nothing had changed. She was still just another face in the mess hall, moving between tables, stacking trays, and pouring coffee with polite smiles. But for the colonel, everything had changed. He now knew her secret, her past as a special forces operative, her extraordinary skills, and the calm strength she carried beneath her unassuming exterior. He began observing her more closely, not out of suspicion, but out of respect and curiosity. He noticed the subtle ways she moved, the small details she paid attention to, the quiet efficiency that made her almost invisible yet impossible to overlook. Her presence was calming, but it carried an authority of its own. She did not command attention. Instead, attention naturally followed her, drawn by the quiet confidence she radiated. Even the soldiers who worked alongside her began to sense that there was something different about her. At first, it was small observations, a perfectly timed gesture, a quick solution to a minor problem, the way she seemed to notice things others missed. A young recruit who dropped his tray found it returned to him without a word. A spilled drink was quietly cleaned before anyone noticed. Little moments like these began to build a quiet admiration among those around her. They didn't know why, but they respected her, trusted her, and sometimes even sought her out for advice or help. The colonel, seeing this, decided it was time to acknowledge her talents in a subtle way. Not publicly, not in front of the entire base, but quietly, so that she would understand that her skills were seen and appreciated without forcing her out of the life she had chosen. He began assigning small responsibilities that matched her abilities, tasks that required observation, problem-solving, and strategy. Each time she handled these assignments flawlessly, the colonel's respect for her grew, and slowly, the soldiers around her began to notice her calm competence even more. Her impact was subtle but undeniable. She could read a room, anticipate needs, and solve problems before anyone even realized there was an issue. In the mess hall, her presence became a stabilizing force. Soldiers who were anxious about a drill or worried about a minor mistake found themselves reassured simply by her calm efficiency. She didn't speak much, but when she did, her words carried weight. Her quiet confidence inspired trust, and over time, people began to look to her not just as someone serving food, but as someone reliable, capable, and wise. The colonel watched this unfold with satisfaction. He could see that she was earning respect, not by boasting or commanding, but by simply being herself. Her actions spoke louder than words ever could, and in her own quiet way, she was becoming a leader among those who didn't even know her full story. The colonel knew that one day, her skills would be needed in a larger capacity, but for now, he allowed her to continue her quiet work, recognizing her contributions without exposing her to unnecessary attention. There were small moments that reinforced her extraordinary nature. During a routine training drill, she noticed a safety hazard that others had overlooked and quietly corrected it before anyone was hurt. During a minor emergency in the kitchen, she handled the situation with calm precision, preventing chaos before it even began. Each act, no matter how small, reinforced the truth that she was not just ordinary. She was exceptional. Even the soldiers who initially thought of her as just the mess hall worker began to see her differently. They noticed her subtle awareness, her ability to handle difficult situations without panic, and her quiet but undeniable skill. Some began to seek her out for advice, not knowing the full extent of her past, but trusting her judgment because of what they had witnessed firsthand. Respect grew quietly, naturally, without fanfare, and it was all because she had chosen to act with humility and excellence rather than show off her abilities. The colonel, meanwhile, began considering the future. He knew that her skills could be invaluable, but he also understood her desire to remain hidden, to live quietly for a while. He didn't want to force her into a role she wasn't ready for. Instead, he decided to mentor her subtly, giving her small opportunities to use her skills, all while respecting her choice to remain in the background. This balance, he realized, would allow her to stay true to herself while also preparing for the day when her extraordinary abilities might be needed again. As weeks passed, the young woman continued her work in the mess hall, unnoticed by most, respected by a few, and quietly building her legacy in ways that no one outside of the colonel's awareness could see. The ordinary life she had chosen allowed her to heal, to reflect, and to carry herself with the calm strength that had always been part of her. And for the first time in a long while, she felt at peace, her skills intact, her past honored, and her present life quietly meaningful. The colonel, standing nearby, watched her with pride and admiration. He knew that her story was far from over. Her humility, combined with her extraordinary abilities, made her one of the most remarkable individuals he had ever encountered. And while the soldiers in the mess hall remained largely unaware, he knew the truth. The young woman serving breakfast was no ordinary worker. She was a hidden hero, respected quietly, her strength and skill shaping the lives of those around her in ways no one could fully see. And so, life continued, the mess hall buzzing with routine, laughter, and conversation. But beneath the ordinary surface, extraordinary things were quietly unfolding. Respect had been earned, trust had been built, and the foundation was laid for a hero whose story was far from finished. She had chosen humility, but in doing so, she had made herself unforgettable to those who mattered most. Life at the base had settled into a steady rhythm, but for the colonel, everything had changed. He now knew the truth about the young woman who had quietly served breakfast in the mess hall, and he carried that knowledge with respect and admiration. She had revealed her past, demonstrated her extraordinary skills, and yet chosen to remain humble, hidden in plain sight. Over the weeks, he had watched her earn quiet respect from those around her, not through words or rank, but through her actions, her calm confidence, and the subtle power she carried in every gesture. The young woman continued her work in the mess hall with the same steady efficiency. Soldiers came and went, chatting, laughing, and occasionally bumping into each other. But she remained a constant presence, moving gracefully between the tables. She served coffee, handed over trays, and smiled politely at thanks. Yet there was an invisible layer to her presence now. Even those who didn't know her full story could sense that she was different. There was something in the way she observed, the way she handled small challenges, the way she moved through the room without drawing attention yet making everything feel smoother and easier for everyone around her. The colonel had begun to see another side of her, the way she subtly mentored those around her without ever announcing it. A new recruit who fumbled with a tray might find that she silently corrected his posture or offered a quiet word of advice. A soldier struggling to remember a task might glance at her, and a simple nod or gesture would guide him without anyone else noticing. Her mentorship was quiet, almost invisible, but effective in shaping those around her into better, more capable individuals. Over time, the soldiers who worked with her began to notice her skill, even if they didn't understand its origin. They admired her calm under pressure, her ability to anticipate needs, and her uncanny sense of awareness. Some joked that she seemed to know what would happen before it even occurred, but they respected her without questioning it. She didn't seek recognition or attention, and that humility made her all the more remarkable. Those who had the chance to observe her closely, like the colonel, realized that she was extraordinary in a way that went far beyond physical skill. She possessed wisdom, intuition, and leadership that could not be taught. The colonel decided to let her continue in this quiet role, knowing that her skills were still intact and that she had chosen this life deliberately. But he also knew that one day, circumstances might demand her full abilities. When that time came, she would step forward without hesitation, capable of handling whatever challenge was set before her. For now, he allowed her to operate in the background, recognizing that her contributions were invaluable even in this understated way. One afternoon, as she finished clearing tables and organizing the mess hall, a group of young soldiers approached her hesitantly. They had noticed her skills and composure, and though they didn't know her full story, they wanted guidance. She smiled gently, quietly demonstrating how to move efficiently, how to observe without panicking, and how to remain calm under pressure. The colonel watched from a distance, realizing that she was shaping the next generation of soldiers without anyone knowing the depth of her influence. Her legacy was growing quietly, built on respect, skill, and humility. The soldiers she mentored began to emulate her behavior. They became more aware, more careful, and more confident. She didn't demand it, she didn't instruct formally, but her presence alone set a standard. The mess hall, once an ordinary place, had become a classroom of subtle discipline and quiet leadership, all because of her invisible influence. Even the colonel was struck by how naturally she inspired those around her, guiding them not through authority but through example. As the weeks passed, she found a quiet satisfaction in this work. It was far removed from the intensity of the missions she had once undertaken, but it was meaningful in its own way. She had found a way to balance her extraordinary past with a peaceful present. She was helping others grow, creating stability, and earning respect, all without ever stepping into the spotlight. Her life had purpose, and she carried it out with the same dedication that had defined her in the special forces. The colonel occasionally spoke with her privately, offering guidance and encouragement. He reminded her that her skills would always be needed, that she had the power to make a difference whenever she chose. But he also understood her need for peace, for a life where she could exist quietly and rebuild herself after the years of extreme pressure and danger. There was no judgment in his voice, only respect, and that recognition meant more to her than accolades or rank ever could. And so, the story of the young woman in the mess hall became one of quiet heroism. She was no longer just someone serving food. She was a mentor, a guide, a stabilizing force for those around her. Her skills remained sharp, her mind alert, and her influence growing, all while she lived in the background, unassuming and humble. To anyone who didn't know her, she was ordinary. To those who saw her truly, the colonel, a few careful observers, She was extraordinary, a living example of courage, skill, and quiet strength. The final days in this chapter of her life were peaceful, yet full of subtle power. She had chosen her path, found respect, and quietly shaped those around her. And in that ordinary mess hall, a hero's legacy was quietly unfolding, proving that true greatness does not always demand recognition. It often thrives in silence, influence, and humility. Her story was far from over, but one thing was certain. The young woman with the Special Forces tattoo had found her place in the world, and the impact she made, though unseen by many, would last far longer than anyone could imagine. The ordinary had become extraordinary, and she had done it quietly, with dignity, skill, and heart.